Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Mormons. I'm the Senior Vice President of Entrepreneurship and Venture Development at the Arizona Commerce Authority. I'm excited to be presenting today's session of the Arizona Small Business Bootcamp. So first, I want to thank our community partners, many of whom, but not all, are listed on this page. We could not present this bootcamp to all of you without their support. We're very fortunate to have such a statewide effort trying to bring additional resources to all of our small business owners. If this is your first time joining us, the Small Business Bootcamp is a daily kind of training session aimed at businesses with 20 employees or less, although anyone is welcome. So if you've got more than 20 employees, glad to have you. The statewide initiative, like I said, we were supported by community partners across the state, and it's a daily bootcamp, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m., bringing you resources and information on how to respond, plan, and return stronger through the COVID crisis. We originally thought we'd be running for 6 weeks, but it's been so popular that we're going to be going at least through June. So be sure to keep looking out for topics and registrations as we continue to bring you content. We're very excited about our lineup this week. On Monday, we had a great session around kind of the legal implications for your workforce during a reopen. Yesterday, we had a Chris Ronzio, a local entrepreneur, talk about how to revamp your business during the COVID time. Today, we've got members from Kaiser talking about how to avoid chaos in your new workspace. And then Thursdays are our safety day with members from the National Safety Council. And on Friday, we've got a very special guest. One of the global leads from marketing at Facebook is going to be talking about all the new Facebook tools for small businesses, how they've partnered with Shopify and others to kind of create a storefront on their platform. So I'm going to hand it over now to Robert Theobald, our Small Business Ombudsman, to give some updates around PPP.
Hey, good morning, everybody. So if you weren't on the call yesterday, I shared some updates. As of May 16th, there was about 114 billion remaining in the PPP funds. That was a few days ago. Based on the trends, we're still sitting at probably 110 billion or more available as of today. And through rounds 1 and 2, Arizona businesses have received, there's been over 72,000 Arizona businesses that have received more than 8.5 billion in loans from the PPP program. And again, the SBA has released PPP loan forgiveness applications and instructions. Included the link that will be posted on the recap of this session. You can link to that. And we will be doing a session next week on Tuesday as well to talk in more detail about the loan forgiveness application and answer a lot of the questions that you may all have for it. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert. So before we start, I wanted to also point at some additional resources that we have available. So we've partnered with the SBDC organizations across the state, which are a great resource for business coaching, consulting, lending, guidance, things like that. As well as through the ACA, we've got this great new Arizona at Work initiative, which is kind of around workforce development, certification, job finding, that sort of thing. And then our MEP program helps manufacturers in the state as well. So be sure to check out all of these and more at our website, azcommerce.com. I'd also point you to arizonatogether.org, which is the governor's website around all things Corona or COVID, including additional resources, guides, business support, and contact information. So I'd encourage you to check that out as well. Throughout this process, we've been compiling all sorts of guides that can be industry or vertical specific. So whether you're a retailer, restaurateur, small business owner, barber, cosmetologist, there's all sorts of guides for you. We've got these listed on our site as well, or over at that arizonatogether.org site. I encourage you to check those out. Finally, we've got a great website for all things COVID response. Check out azcommerce.com /COVID-19 for the latest information and resources and updates to help you and your business return stronger. So today, I'm very excited to bring you this group of speakers from Kaiser. Ruth Darby, Darius Green, and Brian Uretsky are going to be covering kind of the new workspace. What does that look like? How to avoid chaos, and how to navigate kind of the physical space aspect of returning to work. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to Ruth to share her screen.
Thanks, Mark. As Ruth is setting up the screen, my name is Darius Green. As Mark introduced us, I'm one of the co-founders of Kaiser. For those that aren't familiar with Kaiser, one of the reasons why the Arizona ACA invited us today to this boot camp collective to talk about strategies for avoiding chaos as you reopen your work environments is because, you know, we're a firm that's in the trenches and has been in the trenches doing this as a commercial real estate firm that focuses on businesses, on serving businesses exclusively and not landlords and developers. And so we've been talking to thousands of landlords about rent deferment on behalf of our clients. With regards to kind of the social distancing aspect of it, we have a project management division that helps our clients build out their space, whether it's a tenant improvement or whether it's a greenfield build to suit. And then lastly, and we'll touch on this in the presentation, we're going to be talking about the effects on culture within small businesses. And we deal with culture. We're a unique firm in that we're not just a commercial real estate firm. We actually have what we call our business advisory services division, which is essentially human capital consulting. And we touch on all the issues that businesses have with their human capital from A to Z. And so we'll be touching on that, and we you know, we're in the trenches every day dealing with those things, and that's why we're grateful to be here presenting to you on this topic. And then lastly, before I hand it over to Ruth, I want to talk to you about the format of today's presentation. And the format is, it's going to be us answering, you know, common questions and concerns that come up during this time as we reopen our workplaces. And, you know, we didn't just think of these questions off the top of our head. They're actually survey based. So we surveyed our client base on what's important to them, what their concerns are, and then formulated the presentation based off of that. So hopefully to those of you on the call today, it's very helpful and informative. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ruth, who's going to talk about some of the main challenges that you're going to be facing coming out of this.
Thanks, Darius. Can everybody see the screen, Mark? Yeah, okay.
Yes, you look
I can't
great.
see it on.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So one of the main, some of the main challenges that people have been asking us about are on this screen. I'm not going to touch on every single one of these because we're going to go in more depth as we go through the presentation. But obviously the number one issue has been keeping employees safe, which we're going to go into in a little more detail, but that's all encompassing as far as, you know, what happens when we go back to the office? What if they don't want to go back to the office? Or what if they don't? Or you know, what if they have transportation issues? There's lots that goes into that particular topic. We're also talking about eliminating cost. That's a big one, especially with your real estate and your employees. And a lot of things that you're going to be running into are obviously you have rent to pay, but you don't have employees in the space. How do you deal with that? That would be most likely rent relief. You know, maybe you need to sublease your space, or maybe you have vendors that you're working with that since you don't have employees at the office, you don't need to be working with anymore. How do you negotiate getting out of some of those contracts? So there's a lot that goes into eliminating costs in all aspects. And obviously the one that a lot of us don't want to talk about is the fact that some of us did have to lay off some employees around the world. I think that's something that everybody's dealing with, and not a fun one, but it is a part of eliminating those costs. And the sooner that you can work on that list of cost elimination, the better off you will be, because you're going to start saving your cash right away. Maintaining culture and brand experience is extremely important to your business. We're going to go more in depth into that one later. Maintaining productivity, that one's obviously very important because that's the heartbeat of your business. Incorporating social distancing measures, that's one we're going to go into further. Transportation is one that a lot of people aren't thinking about. It's probably not as big of an issue in Arizona as it is in other cities. we're seeing it all over the world. We do a lot of global work as well as local work. What we're seeing is that if you have a big employee base that is coming in on public transportation, about 10 to 15% in the bigger cities are making it to the office, and everybody else is kind of getting stuck. So having to come up with things like, you know, a staggered work schedule, or some companies have talked about doing a satellite office. And obviously with the smaller companies, you're probably not to that point yet, but you're going to start hearing about that from other companies that you may work with, that they're having a hard time getting their employees to the office. So that's something to take into consideration when you're working with others, or if you have an office that's not in Arizona and is in a densely populated area. So Brian is going to talk about cities.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. So which cities are facing the biggest challenges in terms of reopening? Obviously, every city and every person in the country has been impacted by COVID. But when you think about the cities that are most impacted, we believe that New York, Boston, and Chicago are at the top of the list. And this is mainly due to three factors. One, all three of these cities have been hit hard by contracted cases of COVID. If you think about New York, Massachusetts, and Illinois, all three states are in the top 4 of states with contracted cases. Two, each one of these cities' infrastructures don't lend to social distancing very well. All three cities rely heavily on public transportation as well as elevator usage. All three have a significant amount of skyscrapers. So getting into the office or getting into your establishment is going to be a challenge for the foreseeable future. And then all three cities do experience tourism to some extent. And just given the fact that they have a high number of cases in all three cities, it's just, you can bet that in the short and medium term, you're just not going to see as many tourists come to these cities. There are other cities that are obviously impacted as well, but just to a lesser extent. Houston, with the oil sector feeling some pain over the past few weeks. Los Angeles, where there are a high number of cases, as well as there'll be limited tourism over the foreseeable future. And then comparatively, just looking at Arizona, just given this audience, tourism will impact Arizona as well. But given how the city is structured in terms of infrastructure, as well as the overall number of cases, we do think that the impact on our cities, it will be significantly less than the three mentioned above. Which property types are facing the biggest challenges in terms of reopening? Hotels, retail, and office throughout commercial real estate. These are the main three property types that we think will be impacted, and in this order to some extent. Hotels have obviously been impacted over the past 2 months, just given the travel ban and just people traveling less than what we're used to seeing, especially between now and the end of the year. We just don't expect much in the way of travel. Occupancy rates in March and April were much lower than what hotels are used to seeing, roughly 10 to 20% of the numbers that we saw last year. So hotels have felt significant pain throughout this crisis, and we do expect that to continue. Retail, same story there. With the company basically on the country basically on lockdown, as well as social distancing practices being in place for the foreseeable future. We just expect most retail establishments, be it malls, restaurants, and smaller entities, bars and whatnot, are going to continuously be impacted, mainly because occupancy is going to be down. And if you look at some of the store closure data, it just doesn't paint a pretty picture for retail. Just looking at some estimates, UBS came out with expectations of 100,000 store closures between now and 2025. That's an average of 20,000 store closures per year. That's double the previous record, which happened last year, double the record each year till now, between now and 2025. So we do expect retail to experience a significant amount of pain as well. And then on the office front, office is going through a sea change to some extent, with everybody working from home and with the economy in a pretty bad state. companies are going to be looking to shift a lot of employees to working from home, which is going to decrease the overall footprint needs for a lot of businesses out there. So in terms of commercial real estate as a whole, we do expect commercial real estate values to fall. We expect vacancy rates to rise and rents to fall in the short and medium term at least.
We can't hear you.
Darius, you're up.
Sorry about that. So what should landlords be responsible for as you're coming back to the workplace? And this is really important because, you know, as you see in the first icon there, it's keeping tenants safe, right? But it really should be keeping everyone safe, right? Not just the tenants, but the you know, the visitors to the building, period. Whoever's going to be in the building, whether that's your clients, you know, other contractors, your employees, of course, et cetera. And so this is a really important time to be over communicative with your landlord, with your property managers, and really document as well what the expectations are with regards to these things we're going to talk about here briefly. And the first one of those is going to be screening protocols, right? Access to the building. How are you going to screen people that are going to access the building? And from the different access points, whether that be the parking garage, the front door, the side door, etc. That should be a landlord responsibility, okay? Now, obviously the second layer to that is your space access as a tenant, where the tenant is going to be responsible, obviously. But in between building access and space access is that common area, right? And so that's another area where you need to be really proactive in communicating with property management and with the landlord on what your expectations are, what they're going to be doing, what the protocols are for social distancing, what the cleaning frequency is for things like bathrooms, elevators, escalators, and what the level of cleaning is, the level of thoroughness, the standard, that should be established as well. So you really want to take this opportunity to leverage your influence as a client, as a tenant, especially if you're a larger tenant, to you know, really impose upon the landlord what's expected to keep your employees safe and everybody that's coming to visit you and the building safe. In addition to that, you know, if we're talking about an office scenario, typically your lease is going to call for, if it's a full service gross lease, going to call for your space to be cleaned anywhere from 3 to 5 times a week. Well, this is an opportunity to renegotiate that point in your contract and get that documented, where, you know, the cleaning frequency is increased, and again the standard is set. So you know, again, we're all in this together. You want to be proactive. Obviously the landlords are going to be sensitive to your needs because you're their client in a way, right? They want to keep you happy, and they have standards that have been handed down to them too from the governmental authorities. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Brian. He's going to talk about trends that are here to kind of ease our concerns as we move forward.
Thanks, Darius. Question 5, what are some trends that will ease the fear of returning to a working environment? You know, this question, I believe, is rooted in 2 specific sectors. One, the frequency that we'll see more people stay at home, and then 2, social distancing. And when you think about the office environment, as I mentioned before, you know, we do expect more people to stay at home in the short and medium term. And then in some cases, just mentioning Twitter, for example, they are allowing their employees to stay home permanently if they choose. So we do expect staggered schedules for employees, compressed work week, as Ruth mentioned before, satellite office usage, where if you have a main headquarters in a large metropolitan area where it's difficult to get into the office, having a satellite office in somewhere in the suburbs may make more sense for that company. So we do expect an increase in the percentage of people working from home for the foreseeable future, particularly in office. In terms of social distancing measures, what we're likely to see, I think people have heard most of these characteristics or trends that are out there at the moment. Increased spacing between workstations. We expect that to be here throughout 2020 and maybe longer. Temperature scanning, one-way corridors to make sure that people aren't bumping into each other in the office, increased sanitization and minimizing physical contact between employees. And then I think each office is going to have to come up with their own strategy in terms of how to operate within meeting rooms, the bathroom, the kitchen, just how to limit interaction between employees, maybe taking some chairs out of the conference rooms that people are typically meeting in. It's just one example of how each office is going to have to adjust, because mainly the big issue is that most companies are not going to want the liability of someone contracting the virus on their watch. So that is a major concern for most companies. On the retail side, increased online activity. E-commerce has obviously grown as a percentage of all retail sales over the past 20 years. It now makes up roughly 11 to 12% of all retail sales. We do expect, just given the changing in shopping habits that we're seeing over the past couple of months, we do expect that e-commerce is going to grow to be a larger piece of the overall pie of overall retail sales. So we do expect to see that continue to rise significantly over the short and medium term and the long term as well. Curbside pickup, we've all seen this trend pick up. We do expect to see that continue. Occupancy limitations. Yeah, we've all heard of some restaurants opening at 25% capacity, 50% capacity. That's a real big challenge for restaurant owners in the current environment, just given the fact that they have a ton of fixed costs, with real estate being one of them. If they're only operating at 25 or 50% capacity, it does pose some significant challenges and leads towards that store closure comment that we talked about earlier. Additional signage and temperature scanning, we do expect to see that for the foreseeable future in the retail space. I'll pass over to Ruth now, who will touch upon transportation and elevator usage changes.
So Brian kind of touched on this a little bit in the other sectors, but overall, you're going to see a lot more temperature scanning when you go to the doctor's office. They're probably going to meet you in the lobby even before you get to the elevator. Some of that's going to be landlord driven. Some of that's going to be tenant driven. It just depends. It's going to be different from landlord to landlord. Unfortunately, they're not all the same. And so some of it's going to be put on the tenants and some is going to be put on the landlord. There will be occupancy limitations in the bathrooms. I've heard some conversations about whether or not they're going to actually control the flow of people coming and going in common area bathrooms. Obviously, the increased sanitation, additional signage, wash your hands, don't touch your face, stand here. We've seen a lot of those if you've been at the grocery store. I was at the airports yesterday, and there was a ton of signage. Not very many people, but a ton of signage. Controlled spacing efforts, again, that has a lot to do with the signage. Keeping people distanced enough in all the public areas, and minimizing physical contact. Make sure, I can't stress this enough, make sure that you talk to your landlord and ask them exactly what they're doing in your building, or your space or your center, to find out exactly what you're going to need to do in order to fill in the gaps, both for your customers and for your employees. Because like I said, not everybody is doing it the same. And you don't want to hear from someone else that this is what my landlord's doing and not take control of your space and then run into issues. So we get this question a lot. What specialists can help me navigate my situation? There's a lot to navigate right now. You have space planning that you have to deal with if you're trying to distance, whether you're in retail, office, or industrial. So having a architect that you can work with that can help you figure out what what you need to do to make the best use of your space. Retrofitting, project management would be super helpful right now because you've got, you know, screens that might need to go up, or furniture that needs to be moved, or you need to focus on your business right now. That is your number one priority. And so making sure you have people to help you with this so that it doesn't take all of your time is very important. The other thing is lease analysis, finding out, you know, can I do a sublease? If I do a sublease, what are some of the fees I'm going to see? Or, you know, what's the process I have to go through? Do I have a termination option? Maybe you can terminate your lease and go find something smaller. So utilizing a broker, obviously Kaiser, that's what we do, and we do a lot of it. We do free lease analysis. So if anybody wants to have their lease looked at, let us know. Force majeure, you're going to need an attorney. This is one of those things that has been talked about a lot, that we're not sure which way this is going to go, and it could end up in the Superior Court at some point. Some landlords are just giving, you know, they're saying, yep, we're going to agree to the force majeure, and others are digging in. So you're going to need an attorney if that's something that you're looking at some point. Access to capital, we all, you know, not all of us have good banking relationships. We've gone online, and so a lot of people have gotten away from that personal contact. Very important for you guys to have, if you need access to capital, that relationship is super helpful. And then lastly, accounting implications. If you took out the PPP loan, how does that affect your taxes at the end of the year? And anything else you're doing, if you're subleasing your space, or if you're giving back space, you need to consult with a CPA to help you kind of navigate what that looks like, because all of the stuff we're going through right now, none of us have really dealt with at this level before. And so finding out who you need to work with on those things is super important right now. Digging in a little bit more on what you can do as far as your lease goes. So we don't know if there's going to be another stay-at-home order and how that's going to affect us, but you need to understand what your rights are with your lease. You know, do you have subleasing rights if you need to downsize your space, or if you need to get out of your space? You know, what would it look like if you were to right size your space? And right sizing is basically, you know what, I'm in too much space and I need to either get smaller, or I'm not in enough space and I need to get bigger. And it's going to depend business to business. Buyouts, you're going to see a lot of people doing lease terminations right now if they're trying to downsize and they can't, or they just need to close that office because everyone's going to start working from home, which for some of the smaller businesses, we're seeing a lot. People are trying to bring as much of their workforce to work from home right now to save on that cost. And then if you only have 1 to 2 years left on your lease, you may want to also consider a renewal downsize. And basically what that is you're just going to renew early and negotiate to have a little bit longer lease term, but you're going to decrease your space size. And I think that as we move forward, a lot of the landlords are going to be more open to that. We're on the, we're kind of at a point right now where some are and some aren't, but I think we're going to have everybody coming over to the other side pretty soon on that. And again, I think you're going to hear this through the whole presentation, but communicate with your landlord as much as you can. It's super important for them to know where you're at. And if you're communicating with them, they're going to be more willing to work with you. And if something comes up that could help you with another tenant, then they're going to call you and say, hey, I know you were looking for a smaller space. They're looking for a larger space. I mean, that would be in a perfect world, but you never know. And Darius is going to talk to you about culture.
All right. So how do you reinforce and maintain your culture, okay, during this time? Well, no matter what type of culture you have, we know that safety, right, is the bedrock of culture, right? COVID presents us a new nuance. Prior to that, you know, depending on what your business is. If you were, for instance, a manufacturer, you know, the focus on safety was no accidents, right? No injuries. Or if more of an office environment, it was, you know, a more of a workplace harassment safety context, right? So this is a new context, and it's still just as important to make sure you communicate. Again, like Ruth was saying, we're going to say that a lot. You want to communicate to your constituency how important safety is to the culture. It's the bedrock, okay? Moving from there, you can create a community, and community is culture, right? That's what culture comes out of. And so how do, you know, one way to preserve that, if you haven't been doing it, is do it virtually. You know, one of the things, and this is probably a cheesy example, and it's definitely not original, but what we've been doing at Kaiser weekly is we have a virtual community. It's voluntary, you don't have to do it, but it's a virtual happy hour on Zoom. And you know, we play games like Pictionary, and it brings everybody together, and it's lighthearted, and you get that sense of community created. You get to see each other and get to tell jokes and have fun, right? And you want to make sure to invite discussion from all of your staff, not just your executives, not just your management, but all your staff, on how you keep that community, how you keep that culture going, to make sure that everybody is interconnected. Of course, you want to have safe in-person social opportunities as we move forward, and because there's nothing like connecting in real life. However, you don't have to come up with all the ideas yourself, or your executive team doesn't have to come up with all the ideas yourself. Again, communicate to your employees using all different platforms that you have the virtual open door, right? You want to hear from them on what they need or ideas they have about keeping the culture alive, or how the culture is going to transform into what may be a new normal going forward, at least for the near term. So let them know that you solicit their input, and communicate that both in, you know, pick up the phone and call, you know, maybe somebody that doesn't even report directly to you if you're the president or CEO, and tell them you want to hear from them about, you know, about their ideas on keeping the culture alive. Don't just rely on yourself or your executive management team to do that. And then just, you know, again, communicate that through different platforms: social media, Zoom calls, emails, of course, even texting. So moving on from that to the next slide, we're going to talk about preparing for the business for the uncertain future, right? So flexibility is key now. Nobody knows how this is going to unfold in the next months and years to come. And so maximum flexibility. So depending on where you are in your lease term, you're going to either want to renew for a short term if you can. Ruth mentioned earlier termination options. If you feel like you have to renew for a longer term, or the landlord's forcing your hand, or there's, you know, no other way to do it, try to get termination options built into the lease so you have some flexibility in what is traditionally a static long-term agreement, when we know that business changes, right? And you can lay off employees, but you can't lay off your lease. So you got to have some flexibility built into that lease. And of course, your broker can help you negotiate that. And then number two, stay informed. Again, here's an area where you can lean on your trusted advisors to keep you informed. Give them that permission to send you stuff. And it can be just something as simple as positive reinforcement. Hey, thanks for sending me that article or that white paper. I found it really helpful. Well, then they'll keep sending you more so you can stay informed, right? But a lot of times, if they send you something and they don't get any feedback, they think, I don't want to bother them, and they might stop sending you stuff. So lean on your service professionals to help you stay informed. And obviously you want to do your own due diligence as well. Proactive planning, right? I don't know too many people personally, and I would wager that there's not a lot of businesses that said, hey, how do we plan just in case there's a worldwide pandemic where our business is shut down, or at least our workplace is shut down? What are our contingency plans for that, right? So now let's use it as a lesson to be proactive going forward, right? And that kind of leads into the next point: be prepared to pivot your workforce. What if there is another order, right, to get shut in? How can you pivot your workforce now to be reactive to that in a proactive way? How do you plan proactively for that situation? And then lastly, again, communicate. And part of that communication is, right, because everybody's been shut in for a number of weeks or months, and some people are anxious to get out of the house and get back to the office. And you want to communicate that plan to them. You might not be ready right now when the governor says you can't go back. It might take a month. It might take longer. You want to communicate and over-communicate that plan and address those concerns with your staff. So with that said, I'm going to turn it back over to Ruth to conclude this presentation.
Well, first of all, thank you everybody for your time today. Just a quick reminder, we mentioned it in the presentation as well, but we do like to offer free lease reviews to anybody on this presentation. You can go to kaiser.com/lease, fill out a form there and attach your lease. We will analyze it and get back to you and kind of go over it and explain. Also, we have free educational resources. So we did bring up rent relief a few times on this call. There is actually a webinar that Brian and Jonathan Kaiser did, and that is located on our Tenant Resource Center, which is kaiser.com/Tenant Resource Center. Thank you again, everybody. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much to our speakers. Really, really helpful information. And just to build off of what Ruth said, Jonathan Kaiser also did a session around negotiating rent relief for this boot camp. I sent over the link to where that's recorded on our boot camp website. You can go back and watch that as well for kind of tips on how to have that conversation with your landlord. We do have a few questions for our speakers today. One of them is kind of around that rent relief conversation. What do you do if your landlord isn't receptive to that and you were forced to kind of close because of the shutdown order and they just aren't willing to kind of have a repayment plan or provide any relief? Is there any tips for that? Is there a legal mechanism? Do you just kind of negotiate a buyout? Any tips for that?
So I can take that one. I'm going to say it depends. And the reason is, I guess one, did they use a broker? Because we can push pretty hard as a broker. We know what buttons to push. We can take a look at the lease and see, if there's anything in their lease that allows them to do something to put a little more pressure on them. And keep having conversations, because every single week things are changing, and they may have gone there 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and the landlord wasn't ready. And if they keep going back, as things change, the landlord may be more willing to do something like that. You want to add to that, Brian?
Yeah, my only thought is that if a landlord rejects the initial request for rental relief, I think that it has a good way to think about it is, one, they could just be rejecting because they see the headlines out there that some tenants don't need rental relief that are requesting rental relief. So it could be a strategic move by that landlord. But two, when you think about a strategy when it comes to making it through this next few months, I think that it's not a zero-sum game. I think getting rental relief for a lot of tenants in the short term can put those tenants in very strong positions long term. And landlords, it's become a tenants market. Landlords that are rejecting tenants right off the bat are not seeing the bigger picture here. When you think about retail, when you think about office and hotel in particular, as I mentioned earlier, in most cases, commercial real estate values are going to be falling, and landlords are going to need long-term leases in place from good, strong tenants. And for a lot of small businesses right now, they are good tenants. They just need help in the short run. So if a landlord rejects right off the bat, I don't think they're necessarily, A, I don't think it's their final answer, and B, I don't think that they're seeing things as clearly as they need to see the overall picture. So I think to go back to what we've talked about in this presentation multiple times, communication's key, and how you communicate matters. And I think that you have to get the landlord to see that you are a going concern and you're going to be there long term.
And feel free to connect, and we can kind of help walk you through that as well. There's no charge for that. So we're happy to help if they've been trying and they can't get through. Maybe if a broker comes in and connects, maybe we can unwedge that a little bit.
Yeah, we've been successful in our rental relief requests with a lot of our clients over the past couple weeks and months.
We have a few questions in the Q&A box if you want to look there, but one of them is around kind of seasonality and how that might impact it. So we're heading into kind of the hot summer months. Arizona's typically slows down a little bit in summer. And are you seeing that have any impact on movement, both kind of within stores, customer retail experience? Is that impacting how you're seeing social distancing efforts, what people are willing to follow, that sort of thing?
I can jump on this one in terms of how Arizonans may treat social distancing. I think that a big issue across the country is how COVID is impacting each specific region. And when you think about New York, Boston, Chicago, California, the numbers are pretty high in those states. In Arizona, the numbers aren't as high on a per capita basis. So maybe the social distancing practices are a little bit more lax here than you're seeing in other areas. If those numbers stay low, I do think that that type of practice will not be as extreme as other areas. But if those numbers start to spike, I think that really you're going to see a stronger push towards social distancing practices. It's more driven by the actual virus than the actual region, from my perspective.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, you know, here in Phoenix, the summer months are the slow months for restaurants and that type of retail. And so, you know, obviously that could be a little bit different where people might not be going on vacation as much this summer, and people are sick of being in the house, and so they might be going out to to restaurants and bars and things of that nature more than they would normally in the summer. Hopefully that's the case, but it could be it's definitely going to be an interesting summer to see how that works out. But if it's a typical slow summer, then obviously the social distancing doesn't become as much of an issue, just because there's going to be less people going in and out of those spaces.
Awesome, thank you. And could you talk a little bit about, I know you mentioned it in your presentation, but just kind of as people plan out their space needs, how should they be factoring in kind of work from home trends? Is it a short-term trend, here to stay? Should people be planning to require less office space for their needs in the future? Is it a 30% thing, a 60% thing? Talk about the work from home kind of migration.
Sure. So I don't think there's going to be a one size fits all answer to that question, just because so many, there's so many businesses do so many different things. And so we've seen a forced experiment for businesses across all industries. And so by now, with a month, 2 months being forced to work remotely, at least many businesses, they should have a good sense on what works for them and what doesn't. and it could be, you know, as granular as individual employees, right? Everybody has different situations at home, whether it's with childcare or just not a great environment to work in, et cetera, or certain departments, right? Certain departments or certain groups might work better and be more productive remotely. Maybe they travel more, or they just are more seasoned professionals that don't necessarily need to be in the office to do what they do for their role within the company. And so it's just going to take that kind of analysis for companies to understand if they want to incorporate remote working long term. Yes, it can greatly impact your overhead when it comes to real estate, and we are seeing, you know, for our clients that are out in the market for lease renewals or for new space right now in real time, yes, requirements are shrinking, you know, and it can be anywhere from 30% to half to 50% of what they typically would need if remote working works for them as a company generally.
Yeah, and to add to Darius's point, it's not always about what the company wants to do. Sometimes it's about what the company can do. And we're entering into an environment where the economy is going to be pretty shaky for the foreseeable future. And if they can cut costs to actually make it through, it makes sense to have a smaller footprint as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing, just to finish that point up, or this question up, is you don't want to be overreactive to something like this, right? And just, you know, I think I saw that Twitter is just going remote everything for forever. Well, don't be surprised if a couple of years from now that changes for Twitter, right? So yes, you want to be fluid and use this time. Like I said before, you've had a forced experiment and an analysis of how it works for your company, but flexibility is still key. Like I was talking about in an earlier slide, and not just with your lease term, but also with your space, how you build it out and the amount of space that you require. If you are shrinking your footprint, we would advise you generally, obviously we don't know your specific situation, but if you're looking at new buildings to relocate into in a smaller footprint, ideally you want to have room to expand and negotiate strong expansion rights, or if you can project well into the future that you are going to need to grow, then obviously you can even negotiate a phased grow in. But definitely you want to have the option to be able to grow contiguously within the building, or at least, if not that, at least within that building or project, to grow if need be, and not be stuck in a building or a space where you only have that space and then you have to go be disjointed and go to another building down the road or across town to house your employees, when it's better generally to have everybody in one place.
Thank you. We've got a question here around hotels and kind of managing customer expectations while also providing safe room environments. Because of the new cleaning requirements, rooms are ready a little later, but because people are desperate to get out of their house, they want to get into their room even earlier. People are demanding kind of higher rate rooms because they assume it's empty inside. I'm wondering if you guys have seen anything around how hotels are kind of managing that process while keeping customers safe, but also managing expectations.
Yeah, I think in the short term, with occupancy rates so low, I think that there's a way to maneuver and keep the time that new guests can enter into the hotel room at an earlier time in the day, just given the fact that, you know, there are different rooms all around the facility that they can kind of maneuver around, just given the fact that it's not a fully stocked hotel. Beyond that, I do think as occupancy rates rise back up, my own personal opinion is that, you know, similar to what we saw after 9/11, where people were respectful about walking through security lines and understanding that there's going to be more, you know, those lines are going to be slower to get through, just given the fact that the TSA is trying to keep everybody safe. I think people are going to respect the fact that hotels are going to be more careful when it comes to cleaning and they're going to approve. They'll adjust. I think customers and guests will adjust their focus and appreciate the fact that a hotel is trying to clean the room more rigidly to make sure that their guests are happy and comfortable inside those rooms. So I think that everyone has to make some adjustments, and if the psyche of the guest has to change a little bit, I think that's likely what we'll see, and a fair expectation.
And I think going back to what we've been saying through the whole presentation, making sure that they're communicating, at every touch point, they're communicating and being thankful to their guests for being patient, even before they find out if they're going to be patient or not, right? Thank you for your patience. We understand that this is taking longer, but this is for your safety.
Yeah, and just
another
to
question.
add to that,
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying,
Go
just
right
to add
ahead.
to that, just me thinking out loud, this is an opportunity for innovation in my eyes, right? I mean, what about creating, if you have the ability to do it, creating a tenant lounge if you don't already have one, someplace where they can touch down, not necessarily being in the lobby, but they can touch down, relax, have a drink, whatever the case may be, while they're waiting for their room, where they feel like they're, in a place where they can kind of let their hair down without standing around in the lobby versus, versus the traditional waiting in the lobby, standing around for the room to get done if they're there early. And that, again, I mean, I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but I'm just saying it's an opportunity for innovation is my point in dealing with this new scenario.
I agree with that.
Another question, it was geared towards hotels, but I think we can make it broader. For businesses that have kind of extra space, or whether there's kind of communal or public space, have you seen businesses start to either kind of rope those areas or close them off to avoid having to clean additional surfaces every few minutes?
I think we're seeing that right now while everyone's adjusting to what the process is going to be and how comfortable people are with it, because everyone's taking on a lot more work. And so I think we're going to see it now, but I think that as people get processes in place, that will relax a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree exactly with what Ruth said.
Another question around rent relief. As I think a lot of people would say, we're kind of entering a new phase of how we've responded to all of this. And so if you were able to successfully negotiate rent relief for kind of phase one, which might have been March, April, May, but now that we're kind of moving forward, do you think you can go back and renegotiate? Are landlords open to kind of a longer term arrangement as economic pressures continue to persist? Or is there a fear of kind of coming off as greedy?
That's a good question. And every situation is different in terms of where the tenant is within their lease, right? In terms of how far they are away from expiration. And also every landlord's in a different situation with regards to, the strength of their balance sheet, the strength of their relationship with their lenders and their bankers. And so what I would say in that situation, generally, if you're going back to the well for rent relief after having already received rent relief, you want to make sure to have your ducks in a row with regards to the case you want to present to the landlord. You want to make sure that your landlord understands that your business is going to be an ongoing concern. And by that, I mean that your business is a winner. It's going to survive through this storm. And if you can show them, transparency, right? Show them your financials, show them what you're doing besides asking the landlord for rent relief to make it through this time, whether that's layoffs, cutting other costs, rolling out new products and services to supplement your income, your whole plan, your whole vision. You're going to want to be able to want to share that with the landlord as you approach them for this rent relief, so they can get the big picture and understand, okay, this tenant has got it together, and just put you in the best negotiation position possible.
Just to add to that too, something that I have been having my clients do is put together both their financials as well as a narrative that they use for everything. So
Exactly.
you're not just going to go to your landlord, you're probably going to your vendors also. And they want a narrative of what have you done so far to mitigate some of the expenses that you've been having to pay. And then, you know, all of the tranches that you've kind of hit. I had to lay off employees. I had to, you know, talk to other vendors. I had to get rent relief. And then looking forward, what are your plans going forward? And how are you going to get back out of this? So they can see, okay, this is just a temporary, little area of my business where I need help from you. But look at going forward, this is how we're planning to dig out of this and be successful for the long term. So it gives them kind of that storyline of what to expect, so they feel more comfortable that if I give you this, you're going to be here still when we come out of this, and be a good tenant.
That's great. Well, that's all the questions, and we're just at the hour. So I want to give an opportunity if you guys have any last kind of comments or thoughts before we wrap.
I don't think so. I think just a reminder that if you guys are interested in a free lease review, we're happy to do that for you. And you can find that on our website, as well as any other educational resources that we have in our Tenant Resource Center at kaiser.com /lease for the lease analysis, or kaiser.com /tenant-resource-center. And thanks again for having us today.
Yeah,
yes,
thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you to the ACA, and thank you all for watching.
Thank you to Kaiser, our panelists, and also our participants. We'll be back tomorrow with our session on safety, both at 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. To create a safe workspace. So thank you again for everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.